Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're skipping the long introductions and jumping right into a piece of history that honestly completely flips our modern ideas of power upside down. It's a story that absolutely captures the true essence of justice.
Picture this. You're the ruler of an entire empire, the commander of the faithful. One day, your personal armor gets stolen and you actually find it with a regular Christian citizen. Now, a typical ruler, they'd probably just take it back by force, right? But not this caliph. Instead, he takes the citizen to court, standing right there in front of Judge Shirai. And here is where it gets absolutely incredible. The judge asks the caliph for evidence. When the caliph can't produce any physical proof, the judge actually rules against the head of the empire and in favor of the citizen. I mean, that kind of submission to the rule of law by a sitting head of state is practically unheard of.
And the immediate aftermath of that verdict? Truly astonishing. The Christian citizen wasn't just relieved, he was completely overwhelmed. Seeing a judge freely and safely rule against the mighty caliph was too much for him. Deeply moved, he actually confessed. He declared, "I testify that these are the judgments of the prophets." He converted to Islam right there on the spot and gave the armor back to its rightful owner.
So you really have to wonder, who exactly was this leader? Who is this historical figure whose profound humility and intense commitment to justice completely overshadowed his own ultimate political power? Because, let's be real, to willingly lose a court case in your own empire takes a very, very specific type of character.
Well, the man in that story was Caliph Ali bin Abi Talib. His life was deeply, deeply embedded in the very origins of Islam. As the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was one of the earliest believers. He actually accepted Islam while he was quite young and grew up right under the Prophet's direct guardianship. Eventually, in the year 35 AH, he became the fourth of the Rightly Guided Caliphs. So his life really spanned from those intense, formative early days of the faith all the way to a deeply tragic martyrdom.
Just to give you the precise historical details, his full name was Ali Bin Abi Talib al-Hashimi al-Qurashi. He took on the immense, heavy responsibility of the caliphate after the passing of Uthman bin Affan. And famously, he carried the kunya, which is an honorific title, of Abu al-Hasanayn. This was a title of deep affection, referring to his two sons, Hasan and Husain, whose mother was Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. When we dig into the historical records, there are certain core characteristics that are universally tied to him, and honestly, it perfectly explains what we just saw in that courtroom story. We clearly see his asceticism and extreme humility in action there. But beyond that, he was renowned for his immense wisdom, his undeniable courage on the battlefield, massive generosity, and a really, really deep understanding of the religion. And the thing is, these weren't just abstract ideas for him, they were the actual principles he lived by every single day.
Now, we can clearly see those principles reflected in his own words. His philosophy on how we treat one another was incredibly profound. Just look at this quote. "Whoever is arrogant towards people will be humiliated." He totally understood that arrogance isn't just a personal flaw, it's like a social poison. It inevitably leads to a leader's, or honestly anyone's, own downfall and loss of respect.
And that worldview expands even further when we look at his take on social responsibility. He said, "The best people are the most beneficial to others." So he wasn't measuring a person's worth by their bank account, their social status, or, their fancy armor. He measured a human being's value by a super practical metric. How much active good are they actually doing for the people around them?
But his teachings also took on a very urgent political tone. He pleaded, stay united and avoid division. And the crucial thing for us to understand here is why he had to emphasize this so strongly. This wasn't just casual, everyday advice. It was a desperate call for unity. Why? Because his era as caliph was unfortunately highly turbulent. It was marked by severe disputes, relentless trials, and major internal battles within the community.
A huge source of this devastating division was a faction known historically as the Khawarij. The source material defines them pretty specifically. They were a group who rebelled against the Imam of the Muslims and totally disobeyed his authority. They were really defined by severe extremism in religion and a strict disobedience to the ruler's commands, essentially framing their rebellion as a total rejection of established authority.
What's really interesting is how historical accounts draw a striking parallel between the behaviors of the Khawarij back then and similar extremist ideologies that we see today. The similarities are definitely there. There's this shared tendency to declare mainstream scholars, rulers, and honestly just anyone who disagrees with them as disbelievers, a concept known as kufr. Historically,
This kind of extreme ideology directly led to the killing of fellow Muslims and spread a massive amount of chaos and destruction.
The tragic climax of all this extremism, this fitna or trial, ultimately reached Caliph Ali himself. Despite all his wisdom and leadership, he was tragically martyred by one of the Khawarij. He was actually struck down while he was just going out for the early morning Fajr prayer. And the saddest part? Rather than solving any of the community's problems, his assassination only violently multiplied the trials, the chaos, and the division among the Muslims of that era.
Yet, despite all that intense political turmoil and his really heartbreaking end, his teachings have endured for centuries. And perhaps nothing is more relevant to us today than his strict emphasis on taking action. He said, "O bearers of knowledge, act upon it, for the scholar is the one who acts upon what he knows, and his knowledge aligns with his actions." Basically, he's telling us, quite bluntly, that having theoretical knowledge is practically useless unless you're actually applying it in the real world. So, let's just pause for a second and really reflect on all this. We've just walked through an absolutely remarkable life. We've seen a man who would literally rather lose a court case than abuse his power, and a leader begging for unity in the face of violent extremism. So what do we actually take away from his deeply just rulings and his ultimate sacrifice? How does a history lesson from centuries ago apply to our lives right now?
Well, that brings us to the core takeaway. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought directly inspired by Caliph Ali's timeless wisdom. Think about the values you hold. Think about the facts you know. Are you simply a passive bearer of knowledge, just treating information like a trophy on a shelf? Or do your daily lived actions actually reflect what you know to be true? Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I really challenge you to let that question guide your actions today.